In the entire history of Disneyland, the park has only ever been closed down 5 times. In November of 1963, the day after President John F. Kennedy was assassinated, in January of 1994, when the 6.7 magnitude Northridge Earthquake struck Los Angeles around 4:30 in the morning, on September 11, 2001, due to the terrorist attacks around the country, and most recently during the COVID-19 pandemic. The 5th time, well, that was when a group of long-haired, tie-dye wearing youths stormed Fort Wilderness on Tom Sawyer Island and got high on Mary Jane while vowing to liberate Minnie Mouse in front of Fantasyland. In this episode of We Love Attractions, we're taking a look at the Yippie Invasion of Disneyland. The year was 1970. Disneyland had just celebrated its 15th anniversary of opening, and the war in Vietnam had already been raging for just as long. Richard Nixon was president, the Kent State Massacre occurred just 3 months prior, and across the United States a counterculture revolution was already underway. One group that rose to prominence during that time was the Youth International Party, better known as the Yippies. By that point, the mainstream media and marketing firms had already co-opted the more popular hippie movement, often selling peace symbols, tie-dye shirts and other things associated with the group. And so the Yippies were formed as a way to counter those stereotypes. The party was started in 1967 by so-called radicals Jerry Rubin.
Because we are the exact opposite of what they are. We're the exact opposite of white, middle-class, Christian, capitalist society.
And Abbie Hoffman.
Those yippies that march on the amphitheater or go downtown or sit in restaurants or demand their rights, they'll be risking their lives, that's right. These cops here are tough. They'd kill you with a smile.
You might remember them from their part in the Chicago 7 trials. The movement often organised street theatrics and pranks as a way to advocate for anti-authoritarianism and to protest the war in Vietnam.
And you'll inherit all the problems that your elders inherited. And you'll have all the problems.
The general back there, yes.
I'm General Westmoreland. I was awarded the longest medal ever given by the United States Congress.
Their meetings were known as powwows, where they stood up to the establishment by doing ridiculous things in public places. Earlier that year, the party had taken part in a demonstration that had left the UC Santa Barbara branch of Bank of America in flames as part of an anti-war protest. At that time, Bank of America had become a symbol of capitalism, which many of the Yippies associated with the root cause of social issues in the United States, and they just so happened to be the current sponsor of a popular Disneyland attraction. It's a Small World. It was decided the location of the next Yippie powwow would be the happiest place on Earth. By that point, Walt Disney had been dead for nearly 4 years, but Disneyland and the Disney Company were still holding on to his legacy and everything he stood for. Walt was still spoken of in the present tense, facial hair was strictly forbidden for cast members, and guests who didn't conform to the normal standard of dress code were only just barely being admitted into the park. In early July of 1970, notices and flyers began to circulate promoting the get-together, which was to be held on August the 6th, the 25th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. Promotional material included Mickey Mouse smiling in his tuxedo with outstretched arms. In one hand he held his top hat, in the other an AK-47. Closer to the date, David Sachs, one of the main organisers of the event, came up with a mock itinerary for the day. It was printed on a flyer. Black Panther Hot Breakfast, 9 AM to 10 AM at Aunt Jeremiah's Pancake House. Young Pirates League, 11 AM on Captain Hook's boat. Women's Liberation, 12 noon. Rally to liberate Minnie Mouse in front of Fantasyland. Self-Defense Collective, 1 PM to 2 PM at Shooting Gallery in Frontierland. Midday Feast, 3 PM barbecue of Porky Pig. Late in the afternoon, Yippies plan to infiltrate and liberate Tom Sawyer's Island. Declaring a free state, brothers and sisters will then have a smoke-in and a festival. Get it on over to Disneyland, August 6th, Yippie. Of course, the one thing that stands out from the flyer is that Porky Pig isn't even a Disney character. Perhaps it was a slip or another jab at the establishment. On the other side of the aisle, Disney leadership were formulating a plan for the day. 3 days before the event, Disneyland executive Dick Nunis held a meeting with all the park supervisors in the Mickey Mouse Theatre in Fantasyland to assign duties and to be briefed by the Anaheim police on what should happen if things get out of control. Some cast members were given civilian clothes to blend in with and monitor the crowds. They would communicate with walkie-talkies concealed in bags using special codes that had been developed to call for backup. Hundreds of police officers from surrounding cities gathered backstage of Main Street before the park opened. Staging areas were set up at the Disneyland Hotel and the Anaheim Convention Center. Marines were even on standby to fly in via helicopter if necessary. Disneyland was expecting to be hit with a crazed rabble of drugged out young people, but as the gates opened and the crowds entered, things were starting off surprisingly well. As Dick Nunis identified members of the Yippies, he casually walked over to them and asked them to be cool in the park that day. He even went so far as to offer them a discount on a group rate of 50 cents per person. The normal adult admission at the time was $3.50. The group rejected Nunis's offer and insisted that private property should be outlawed. Still, Dick Nunis allowed them to enter the park under one condition. If they were there to have fun like everybody else, they were certainly welcome. However, if they had come to make any type of trouble, they would be asked to leave. By early morning, Disneyland had only seen about 500 Yippies show up to the park, a far cry from the 100,000 that the Berkeley Tribute underground newspaper had predicted. Not even Jerry Rubin or Abbie Hoffman had bothered to show up, leaving the group without much direction. At the proposed Black Panther breakfast, there were no demonstrations, merely a few raised fist salutes. A small smoke bomb was found inside of It's a Small World, and 2 Bank of America security officers dressed in tourist clothes spent the day taking photos of anyone near the bank that might be used in future legal proceedings. A few minor scuffles broke out, mostly shoving, but nothing significant was reported. Dick Nunis was so reassured that Disneyland had averted a crisis and an embarrassment that he actually held a 3:20 p.m. press briefing saying that the Yippies, quote, weren't that different from other kids throughout the country. They may look a little different, but they are just here to have fun. Maybe we ought to listen to them a little more. However, as the day went on, activities started to get more heated. A group of about 30 Yippies got up on the second floor of the Chicken of the Sea restaurant in Fantasyland, which was in the shape of Captain Hook's pirate ship. They climbed the mast and sat in the rigging, smoked, got stoned, sang and chanted, and occasionally shouted obscenities at the other guests below. A group of Yippies on Main Street decided to march with the Disneyland band, changing the words of the Mickey Mouse March with "We are marching to Cambodia." As they weaved in and out of the band's marching lines, the band members decided to quickly retreat backstage. At around 4 p.m, a group of Yippies met inside the Main Street Cinema and hatched a plan to take over Tom Sawyer Island. An hour later, 2 raft loads of Yippies made their way over to the island and took over Fort Wilderness. They lowered the American flag and replaced it with a Viet Cong flag. They chanted things like "legalize marijuana" and, of all things, "free Charlie Manson." To calm the situation down, Disneyland officials stopped sending rafts over to the island, but gladly offered to take anyone away from the location. Disney executives were afraid that the Yippies would stay on Tom Sawyer Island past closing and started to organize a plan of action if that were to occur. However, the group got bored after a while and began to make their way back to the mainland. The group decided to head back to Main Street, where they would storm the Bank of America. As they walked towards the building, their numbers swelled. They sang songs about sex, drugs, and rock and roll as they held hands and snaked their way through the streets. Some people even started burning their draft cards while reporters took pictures of the event. More reserved guests that were attending that day saw what was happening and decided to respond by singing "God Bless America." The Yippies countered by yelling obscenities right back at them. One faction of the group gathered around the flagpole on Main Street and tried to raise the so-called Yippie flag, red and black with a green marijuana leaf on it. Another park guest decided to confront the group, saying, "How dare you raise that flag next to the American flag?" A Yippie went to the other empty flagpole and responded with, "If you rip down our flag, we'll rip down your flag." A fight immediately broke out, and about 800 police officers appeared from backstage in brand new riot gear. Other park guests began to cheer as Dick Nunis appeared and told the Yippies it was all over. Disneyland had gone out of its way, but it was time for them to leave the park. The Yippies grew more rowdy and decided to charge through the police lines, dispersing throughout the park. There was nothing else left for Nunis to do but simply close Disneyland. Announcements were made that due to the behaviour of some people, the park would close early. The official closing time was 7:10 p.m. All of the supervisors reported to their assigned perimeter positions to prevent any Yippies from trying to climb the fences and re-enter the park. The group set trash cans on fire, set off firecrackers, threw light bulbs and uprooted plants and flowers. Other guests who had attended that day were offered refunds on their admission tickets, and Disneyland security were much more diligent in future years about screening guests to prevent any reoccurrence of the day's events. In the end, 23 arrests were made on a variety of charges, including assault, disturbing the peace, drug possession, trespassing since they had refused to leave, and generally causing mischief. No serious injuries were reported. When cast members returned to work the following day, they were given a thick envelope. Inside was a thank you letter, a book of ride tickets, and a reprint of a highly charged editorial that had appeared in the Santa Ana Register. It read, "The communist organizers of the revolution made a grave strategic blunder when they decided to take on Disneyland."
It was a kind of ugly fantasy all its own in this place of make-believe, helmeted riot police all up and down Disneyland's Main Street, USA, separating 30,000 tourists and the multi-million-dollar park from an invasion of 300 long-haired Yippies. The Yippies said they had come to liberate Mickey Mouse. Instead, they shouted obscenities at the crowds, took over Frontierland, stormed Disneyland City Hall in the best radical tradition, and shouted out their complaints about police to Disneyland authorities.
Is it normal to see pigs with armored vests and gas masks in front of Disneyland?
The park officials took it as long as their patience held out, then announced to the crowds that Disneyland was closing 6 hours early.
Were you in attendance during the Yippie Invasion of Disneyland, or did you know anybody who was? Leave us a comment with your experiences, or simply let us know what you think about this whole ordeal. It certainly is a bizarre moment in Disney Parks history. As always, show notes for the episode can be found in the description below. Don't forget to give a thumbs up on this video and hit that subscribe button for more, and I will see you in the next episode of We Love Attractions.